The dying janitor nobody knew was a fighter pilot saved 18 people alone. The casino floor smelled of cigarette smoke and broken dreams. The Bellagio in Las Vegas hummed with the electric energy of thousands of gamblers, slot machines chiming their hypnotic melodies, dealers shuffling cards with practiced precision. Crystal chandeliers cast glittering reflections across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Outside the massive windows, the Nevada desert baked under a merciless sun. Nobody noticed when he pushed his cleaning cart past the high-stakes tables. Vince Romano moved through the crowded casino with the invisible efficiency of a man who'd perfected the art of not being seen. He wore a stained janitor's uniform 2 sizes too large, his dark hair shot through with gray despite being only 39 years old. His weathered hands gripped the mop handle with unconscious precision, the grip of someone trained for something far more complex than cleaning floors. To the wealthy tourists and desperate gamblers flowing around him, he was just another Vegas janitor, part of the machinery that kept their fantasy world functioning. "Hey, you missed a spot," a drunk businessman said, laughing mockingly as he deliberately knocked over his drink. The amber liquid spread across the freshly mopped floor. "Oops. Better get that, buddy." His friends erupted in laughter, their voices cruel with the casual contempt the wealthy showed for service workers. Vince said nothing, just nodded quietly and began cleaning the spill. "Man, imagine being a janitor in Vegas," one of the friends said, loud enough to ensure Vince heard. "Surrounded by all this money and knowing you'll never have any. That's gotta hurt." More laughter. Vince kept mopping, his face expressionless, his eyes distant. They had no idea who he used to be. 12 years ago, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Romano had been one of the Navy's most elite fighter pilots. Top Gun instructor. Carrier-based operations specialist. 214 combat missions over Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. The pilot they called Razor because his precision was surgical. He could thread an F/A-18 Super Hornet through impossible spaces at speeds that turned reality into a blur. He'd earned 3 Navy crosses for distinguished flying crosses and a reputation as the pilot who could accomplish missions that other aviators called suicide runs. Then came Operation Crimson Sky over Syria. The mission that the Pentagon still classified, still denied, still buried under layers of secrecy that would never be declassified in Vince's lifetime. His entire strike package, 8F divided by a -18S carrying critical intelligence assets, had been ambushed by advanced Russian air defense systems that shouldn't have been there. Vince watched 7 fighter jets explode in rapid succession, his headset filled with the screams of pilots he'd trained, flown beside, trusted with his life. Jackson, Martinez, Williams, Chun, Rodriguez, Thompson, Davis, all gone in 93 seconds of hell. Vince's own aircraft took catastrophic damage, hydraulics failing, engine on fire, cockpit filling with smoke. He ejected at 17,000 feet and parachuted into hostile territory, landing with 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and burns across his arms from the cockpit fire. He survived 6 days behind enemy lines, evading capture through skills honed from years of survival training, before Delta Force extracted him in a helicopter raid that itself cost 2 more American lives. The Navy gave him a medal in a closed ceremony, a promotion to lieutenant colonel, and then, very quietly, a medical discharge when the PTSD became so severe he couldn't fly without having flashbacks that made him black out mid-mission. "You're a hero," his commanding officer had said with practiced sympathy, his voice carrying the hollow quality of someone delivering scripted lines. "The nation is grateful for your sacrifice." But medals didn't stop the nightmares. Gratitude didn't bring back 7 dead pilots whose families Vince couldn't face. His wife Angela tried to understand. For 3 years, she tried desperately. "I love you," she'd whispered through tears the night she finally left, her voice breaking with exhausted sadness. "But I can't watch you disappear anymore. You survived that mission, but you didn't come home. The man I married died over Syria with your squadron. I'm just living with what's left." The divorce papers arrived 4 months later. For 8 years, Vince drifted across America's invisible margins. He'd worked as a mechanic, a night security guard, a warehouse loader, a dishwasher in diners where nobody asked questions. Never stayed anywhere longer than 6 months. Never got close to anyone. The VA medication helped on good days, when he could afford refills and remembered to take them. On bad days, the bottle stayed unopened because what was the point? Vegas had been his landing spot for the past 11 months. The Bellagio paid cash, asked few questions, and night shift janitorial work meant minimal human contact. Perfect for a man trying to vanish into the background of his own life. His supervisor, a bitter man named Frank who smelled perpetually of cheap whiskey, barely acknowledged Vince's existence beyond handing him assignments and collecting time cards. "You're on High Roller Suites tonight," Frank had grunted that morning, not looking up from his racing forms. 38th floor. "Don't touch anything valuable, don't bother the guests, and for God's sake, don't screw this up like the last guy. Those suites have cameras everywhere." "Understood," Vince had said quietly. Now, 8 hours into his shift, Vince pushed his cart into the service elevator, heading toward the luxury suites where people gambled more money in a single night than he'd earned in the past year. The elevator was empty. The elevator was empty, a rare moment of solitude in the constantly buzzing hive of the casino. Vince caught his reflection in the polished brass doors. Gaunt face. Hollow eyes. The ghost of who he used to be. He looked away quickly, focusing instead on the floor numbers climbing higher. 25th floor. 30th. 35th. At the 37th floor, the elevator stopped unexpectedly. The doors opened to reveal a woman in her 60s wearing hotel management attire. Her name tag read, Patricia Chun, Guest Services Director. She stepped in, glanced at Vince briefly with the automatic dismissiveness people showed janitors, then did a double take. "Do I know you?" she asked slowly, studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. "No, ma'am," Vince said quietly, turning away. But Patricia was still staring, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching recognition. "Navy," she said suddenly. "You were Navy. I can see it in how you stand, that pilot posture. My late husband was a carrier pilot. You have the same." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry." "It's fine," Vince said, hoping she'd drop it. She didn't. "Were you stationed on the Roosevelt?" Patricia pressed gently, her voice softening with genuine interest. "My husband flew off the Roosevelt in the early 2000s. If you knew him." "I didn't," Vince interrupted, more sharply than intended. "I'm just a janitor, ma'am." "You're mistaken." The elevator reached the 38th floor. Vince quickly exited before she could ask more questions, his heart pounding with the familiar panic that came whenever someone got too close to the truth. The 38th floor was quiet, a different world from the chaos below. Thick carpets absorbed sound. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of wealth and privacy. The High Roller Suites here rented for $25,000 per night, catering to oil sheiks, tech billionaires, and celebrities who valued discretion. Vince began his rounds, methodically cleaning the hallways, emptying trash from service alcoves, his movements automatic after months of repetition. He was wiping down a hallway mirror when he heard raised voices from Suite 3812. "I don't care what the policy is," a man shouted angrily, his voice muffled by the heavy door, but still clearly audible. "Fix it now." "Sir, I'm telling you, the system is down." A woman's voice responded nervously, probably hotel staff. "The entire building's climate control system is malfunctioning. Maintenance is working on it, but..." "Working on it? It's 112 degrees outside, and you're telling me the air conditioning is broken?" Vince kept cleaning, trying to ignore the argument. But his trained mind was already processing the information automatically. Building-wide climate control failure. In Vegas. In July. In a hotel housing thousands of guests. That was dangerous. Elderly guests. Young children. People with medical conditions. Heat stroke could kill quickly in these conditions, especially if the building's internal temperature started climbing. Not your problem. You're just the janitor. Stay invisible. But old instincts, the situational awareness drilled into him during years of combat flying, wouldn't shut off. Vince found himself paying attention to details others missed. The hallway felt warmer than usual. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Maybe 3 or 4 degrees higher than when his shift started. The ventilation system's normal white noise, the subtle hum of air circulation, was absent. The silence felt wrong, like the held breath before catastrophe. Through an open service door, Vince glimpsed a digital thermostat. The display showed 81 degrees and climbing. It should have been 72. This wasn't a minor malfunction. This was a critical system failure. Vince pulled out his phone, a cheap prepaid model, and called down to the maintenance office. "This is Romano, janitorial." "This is Romano, janitorial," he said when someone answered. "I'm on 38. The climate control up here is completely down. Temperatures climbing fast. You aware?" "Yeah, we know," the voice said dismissively, clearly annoyed at being bothered. "Frank already called it in. Maintenance is on it. Just keep cleaning." The line went dead. Vince stood there, phone in hand, his combat-trained instincts screaming that this was worse than anyone realized. In a fighter jet, you learn to recognize the difference between a minor malfunction and a catastrophic failure developing. You learn to read patterns, to see cascading problems before they became fatal. And every instinct Vince had was telling him this was about to cascade badly. He abandoned his cleaning cart and headed for the service stairs, moving quickly toward the basement where the building's mechanical systems were housed. The stairwell was sweltering, noticeably hotter with each descending floor. By the time Vince reached the basement level, the temperature felt close to 95 degrees, the air thick and oppressive. The mechanical room door was locked, but Vince had picked more secure locks than this during survival training. He had it open in 20 seconds using a bent paper clip and a piece of wire from his cart. Inside, the massive HVAC system was in obvious distress. The main chiller unit, responsible for cooling the entire building, was running, but something was catastrophically wrong. The compressor was screaming at a pitch that made Vince's teeth hurt, and the pressure gauges showed readings far outside normal parameters. Vince approached the system carefully, his eyes scanning the maze of pipes, valves, and control systems. There, the main refrigerant line had a hairline crack, leaking coolant in a thin, steady stream. The system was trying to compensate by running at maximum capacity, but without adequate refrigerant. It was overheating itself while simultaneously failing to cool the building. At this rate, the compressor would seize completely within maybe 90 minutes. When that happened, the Bellagio would have zero air conditioning in 112-degree heat. With 4,000 guests in the building, that wasn't just uncomfortable. That was dangerous. Potentially deadly. Vince pulled out his phone and called maintenance again. "This is Romano. I'm in the basement mechanical room. Your main chiller has a refrigerant leak in the primary line. The compressor's about to fail catastrophically. You need to shut down the system immediately, and who the hell authorized you to access the mechanical room?" The voice interrupted angrily. "You're a janitor. Get out of there before you break something expensive. I'm trying to tell you. Get out. And I'm reporting this to Frank. You're probably getting fired for unauthorized access." The line went dead again. Vince stood in the sweltering mechanical room, staring at the failing system, and felt the familiar frustration of knowing exactly what needed to be done, but having no authority to do it. In the cockpit, he'd been in command. When he identified a threat, he acted immediately. No bureaucracy, no waiting for permission. But he wasn't a pilot anymore. He was just a janitor who needed to stay invisible. Vince forced himself to leave the mechanical room and return to his cleaning duties, trying to ignore the voice in his head screaming that people were going to die if that system wasn't fixed immediately. Not your problem. Not your responsibility. Not your... His phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "Get to my office. Now." Vince made his way to Frank's basement office, a cramped space that smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. Frank was waiting, his face red with anger. "You want to explain why you broke into the mechanical room?" Frank demanded furiously, his voice rising with each word. "The HVAC system is failing," Vince said calmly. "I was trying to help." "You're a janitor." Frank interrupted, slamming his hand on the desk. "Your job is mopping floors, not playing engineer. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Maintenance is furious. Security is reviewing camera footage to see if you damaged anything. "I didn't damage anything. I was trying to warn them. I don't care what you were trying to do." Frank's face was purple now, spittle flying as he shouted. "You're fired. Clean out your locker and get out. Security will escort you off property." Vince felt something cold settle in his chest. Fired. For trying to help. For foreseeing a problem and attempting to fix it before people got hurt. Fine, he said quietly, turning to leave. And Romano. Frank called after him with cruel satisfaction in his voice. Good luck finding another job in this town. I'll make sure every casino knows you're the janitor who couldn't follow basic instructions. Vince walked away without responding. 20 minutes later, he was in the employee locker room, gathering his few possessions, an extra shirt, a dog-eared paperback, his VA medication bottles. Security guards stood by the door, watching him with bored suspicion. Vince was almost finished when the building's emergency alarm system erupted in a deafening screech. Everyone froze. Then a voice crackled over the PA system. Panicked, trying to sound calm and failing. Attention all guests and staff. We are experiencing a critical system malfunction. Please proceed calmly to the nearest emergency exit. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The security guard's radio exploded with frantic chatter. HVAC system just catastrophically failed. Temperature in the building climbing rapidly. We have elderly guests collapsing on the casino floor. Need medical response to floors 12, 18, 24. How many people are in this building? Over 4,000 guests plus staff. We need to evacuate immediately. The security guard looked at Vince with wide, frightened eyes. All his bored authority vanished. What do we do? He asked desperately, suddenly just a scared kid in a uniform. Vince dropped his belongings and moved toward the door. We save as many people as we can, he said, his voice carrying a command authority that made the guard automatically follow. They emerged from the locker room into chaos. Staff members running in all directions. Guests streaming toward exits. The temperature already noticeably climbing, probably 88 degrees, and rising fast. Vince's combat-trained mind automatically began processing the tactical situation. 4,000 people in the building. Multiple exits, but the main ones would create bottlenecks and crushing hazards. Elderly guests and people with medical conditions would collapse first, blocking evacuation routes. Children could get separated from parents in the panic. This evacuation, if not managed properly, could kill dozens. And nobody was managing it. Hotel staff were panicking, unsure what to do. Security guards were trying to direct foot traffic but contradicting each other, creating confusion. Vince spotted Patricia Chun, the guest services director from the elevator, trying to coordinate near the main casino floor, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression showing barely controlled terror. He moved toward her quickly. Ma'am, Vince said, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority. You need to organize staged evacuation by floor zones, prioritizing elderly and medical vulnerable guests. If everyone hits the main exit simultaneously, people will be trampled. Patricia turned to him, her face pale with stress. Who the hell? Wait, you're the janitor from. I was Navy, Vince interrupted, dropping the pretense. Flight operations. I've coordinated emergency evacuations before. Let me help. Patricia stared at him for maybe 3 seconds. 3 precious seconds where she had to decide whether to trust this random janitor claiming military experience. Then she made her choice. What do you need? She asked, her voice steadying with relief at finding someone who seemed to know what they were doing. Give me radio access to all security channels, Vince said rapidly, his mind already organizing the operation. I need building schematics showing all exits. And I need your authority to direct staff and security. Patricia pulled her radio off her belt and handed it to him without hesitation. All security units. This is Patricia Chun, guest services director. She said into her own backup radio with firm authority. The man now on this channel is Vincent Romano. You will follow his instructions as if they came from me directly. Acknowledge. Confused acknowledgments crackled back from various security posts. Vince clicked the radio and spoke with the same calm authority he'd used coordinating combat missions in hostile airspace. All units, this is Romano. We have approximately 4,000 souls in this building and rising internal temperatures that will cause casualties if we don't evacuate efficiently. We are implementing zone evacuation protocol. Security teams Alpha through Delta, you're responsible for floors 1 through 10. Echo through Hotel, floors 11 through 20. India through Lima, 21 through 30. Mike through Papa, 31 through 40. Each team will evacuate their assigned floors using secondary staircases, not main elevators or central stairs. Prioritize elderly, children, and anyone showing heat distress symptoms. Acknowledged by team. One by one, the security teams acknowledged, the confusion in their voices replaced by focus now that someone was giving clear directions. Medical teams, Vince continued, pulling up the building schematics on Patricia's tablet, set up triage stations at exits Beta, Delta, and Gamma. We'll be bringing casualties to you. Heat stroke, dehydration, panic attacks, elderly collapse. Be ready. Copy that. A voice responded. Hotel medical staff coordinator. Maintenance teams, Vince said, his voice hardening slightly. I know you're dealing with the HVAC failure. Can you give me a realistic timeline on restoration? Silence. Then a different voice. Older, clearly senior maintenance. This is Chief Engineer Patterson. Who the hell is this? Romano. Former Navy. I'm coordinating evacuation. Where's hotel management? Dealing with lawyers and liability, Vince said bluntly. Right now, I'm the person keeping 4,000 people from dying of heat stroke. Can you fix the system or not? Patterson was quiet for a moment. Not quickly enough. The main compressor is seized. We're trying to bring auxiliary cooling online, but it'll take minimum 2 hours, and it won't be enough for the whole building. Then we evacuate everyone and deal with the property damage later, Vince said. How high will internal temps climb? Without cooling? In this heat? Could hit 110 degrees inside within 90 minutes. Copy. Then we have 90 minutes to evacuate 4,000 people. He switched channels. All teams, we have 90 minutes before conditions become immediately life-threatening. Move with purpose, but don't rush. Rushing causes panic. Panic causes casualties. Constant communication. Report any medical emergencies immediately. For the next 45 minutes, Vince coordinated the largest evacuation operation the Bellagio had ever experienced. He directed traffic flow, rerouted teams away from overcrowded exits toward clear ones, identified and rescued elderly guests who'd collapsed in stairwells, talked down security guards who were panicking, coordinated with Las Vegas Fire Department and EMS when they arrived, and maintained a running mental count of evacuees and casualties. His radio never stopped. Romano, we've got a woman having a heart attack on floor 16. Divert medical team Charlie. Send them up service elevator 3. Romano, main exit is completely jammed. Reroute everyone to exits Gamma and Delta. Security team Foxtrot, I need crowd control at main exit. Romano, we have 6 children separated from parents. Set up a child reunification point at the employee parking structure. We'll bring parents there after evacuation completes. Patricia stood beside him the entire time. Watching this janitor, she'd almost dismissed transform into someone completely different, a tactical commander running an operation with the precision of military logistics. Who are you? She finally asked during a brief lull, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. Before Vince could answer, a new voice crackled on the radio. Panicked, younger. This is Security Unit Papa. We've got a major problem on floor 38. One of the high-roller suites. There's a medical emergency. Guest is having a severe heat stroke. Unresponsive. We can't get him down the stairs. He weighs like 300 pounds. Vince's jaw tightened. Floor 38. The luxury suites where he'd been working hours ago. What's the suite number? Vince demanded. 3 to 3,812. The same suite where Vince had heard the argument about the air conditioning earlier. Medical teams, who's closest to floor 38? Vince asked. We're all committed to ground-level triage. The medical coordinator responded helplessly. We don't have anyone available to go up. Then I'm going, Vince said, already moving toward the service stairs. Romano, wait, Patricia called after him. But Vince was already running, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his body responding with the physical conditioning that never quite left despite years of neglect. Floor 10, 20, 30. By floor 35, the heat was brutal, probably 105 degrees in the stairwell. Sweat poured down Vince's face, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his janitor uniform soaked through. Floor 38. He burst through the stairwell door into a hallway that felt like an oven. The temperature had to be pushing 110 degrees. Suite 3812 was open. Two security guards standing over an unconscious man sprawled on the floor, mid-50s, obese, face bright red, not breathing well. He just collapsed, one guard said desperately. We called 911, but they said all ambulances are committed to other calls from the evacuation. Vince knelt beside the man, his hands automatically checking for pulse, breathing, skin temperature. Heat stroke, advanced stage. Maybe minutes away from organ failure. We need to cool him down immediately, Vince said, his voice calm despite the crisis. Get ice from the suite's minibar. All of it. And wet towels. Move. The guard scrambled to comply. Vince loosened the man's collar, positioned him properly, and began rapid cooling protocols he'd learned during survival training. Applying ice to pulse points, using wet towels on the forehead and chest. Is he going to die? One guard asked fearfully, his voice breaking. Not if I can help it, Vince said grimly. But we need to get him out of this heat. He's too heavy for the stairs. We'd kill him trying. Is there any elevator still functioning? Service elevator 3 is on emergency power, the other guard said. But it's not rated for. It'll work, Vince interrupted. Help me get him on a luggage cart. They maneuvered the unconscious man onto a sturdy luggage cart, Vince continuing cooling protocols the entire time. Romano. Patricia's voice crackled on his radio. What's your status? I have the heat stroke victim from 38. We're bringing him down via service elevator 3. Have medical ready at ground level. Copy. Medical is standing by. They got the man into the service elevator. Vince hit the ground floor button and continued applying ice to pulse points, monitoring breathing, talking to the unconscious man even though he probably couldn't hear. Stay with me, sir. You're going to make it. Just stay with me. The elevator descended with agonizing slowness. 30 seconds. 60 seconds. The man's breathing became more regular. The bright red flush started fading slightly. The cooling protocols were working. The doors opened to ground level, where medical team was waiting with a gurney and equipment. Heat stroke, severe, Vince reported rapidly as they transferred the patient. Been down approximately 8 minutes. Core temp probably 108 or higher. Started cooling protocols 3 minutes ago. Pulse is thready but present. Breathing shallow but regular. The paramedics looked at him with confusion. Janitors didn't typically know advanced medical terminology, but they didn't have time to question it. They loaded the man into a waiting ambulance and rushed away. Vince stood in the casino floor, now mostly evacuated, only staff and security remaining, and felt his legs suddenly go weak. He'd just saved that man's life. For the first time in 8 years, he'd used his training, his skills, his leadership to actually help someone instead of hiding from everything he used to be. It felt good. Terrifying, but good. Patricia appeared beside him, handing him a bottle of water. Drink, she ordered firmly. You just climbed 38 floors in 100-degree heat. You'll collapse if you don't hydrate. Vince drank gratefully, the cold water feeling like salvation. We've evacuated 92% of guests, Patricia said, checking her tablet with obvious relief. Fire department confirms we have 0 fatalities. 47 people transported for heat-related issues, but all stable. Vincent, she looked at him directly. You saved lives today. Dozens of them. Maybe more. I just coordinated, Vince said dismissively. Everyone else did the actual work. No, Patricia said firmly, her voice thick with emotion. Everyone else was panicking until you took command. You turned chaos into order. You prevented a catastrophe from becoming a tragedy. Before Vince could respond, a new commotion erupted near the main entrance. A group of men in expensive suits was pushing past security, hotel executives, corporate management, people who'd been safely off property during the crisis and now wanted to assert control. Leading them was a man in his 60s wearing a suit that probably cost more than Vince earned in 6 months. Theodore Bellamy, the Bellagio's general manager according to the monogrammed briefcase. What the hell happened here? Bellamy demanded furiously, his voice echoing across the empty casino floor. I leave for one corporate meeting, and I come back to emergency evacuations and 4,000 guests outside. Patricia stepped forward. Sir, we had a catastrophic HVAC failure. The building's temperature climbed to dangerous levels. We successfully evacuated all guests with minimal casualties. Minimal casualties? Bellamy interrupted, his face turning red with rage. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost in refunds? In lawsuits? In reputation damage? Someone is getting fired for this disaster. Sir, we prevented people from dying, Patricia said, her voice hardening with barely controlled anger. I think that's more important then. I'll decide what's important. Bellamy roared, his control completely gone now. Where's the operations manager? Where's the head of security? Someone is going to answer for this catastrophe. Perhaps you should thank the person who actually prevented the catastrophe, a new voice said. Everyone turned to see an older man approaching, late 60s, wearing a Navy veteran's cap and moving with unmistakable military bearing. Admiral Richard Hawkins, retired. Admiral Richard Hawkins, retired, the man said, introducing himself with calm authority. I was a guest here during the evacuation, and I watched this entire operation unfold. He turned to look directly at Vince, and something shifted in his expression, recognition mixed with shock. Lieutenant Colonel Romano, Admiral Hawkins said quietly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent casino floor. Call sign Razor. Top Gun instructor. 214 combat missions. 3 Navy crosses. Vince felt his chest tighten. Someone from his past. Someone who knew. You're mistaken, sir, Vince said roughly. I'm just a janitor. No, Admiral Hawkins said firmly, stepping closer, his eyes filling with emotion. You're the pilot who flew missions everyone else called impossible. The instructor who trained the best aviators in the Navy. And apparently, he gestured at the evacuated casino. You're the man who just saved 4,000 people using the same tactical command skills you developed coordinating strike packages in hostile airspace. Bellamy looked confused and angry. What is he talking about? Romano, you're a janitor. Are you claiming to be military? He doesn't have to claim anything, Admiral Hawkins said, pulling out his phone and showing Bellamy something. Military service records, clearly obtained through connections that only flag officers maintained. Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Romano, medically discharged 8 years ago with full honors after Operation Crimson Sky, a classified mission where his entire squadron was lost, and he survived 6 days behind enemy lines. He's a decorated combat veteran who's been working as your janitor for the past year. The silence was deafening. Patricia was staring at Vince with shock. The security guards looked stunned. Bellamy's face had gone from angry red to pale white as he processed what this meant. Bellamy stammered. You're a lieutenant colonel? And you've been mopping floors, Vince finished quietly, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. Yeah, because PTSD doesn't care about medals or rank. Because I couldn't face my old life after watching my entire squadron die. Because sometimes being invisible is easier than being broken in public. Admiral Hawkins's expression softened with understanding. I read the after-action reports from Crimson Sky, he said gently, his voice thick with compassion. You flew through an ambush, tried to save 7 pilots against impossible odds, then survived alone in hostile territory. You didn't fail them, Vincent. You fought for them until there was nothing left to fight for. I survived when better men didn't, Vince said, his voice breaking. How is that not failure? Because survival isn't a crime, Admiral Hawkins said firmly. And wasting that survival by hiding is dishonoring what they died for. Today proved that. When this crisis hit, you didn't hide. You led. You saved lives. That's who you are, Vincent. Not the broken janitor. The pilot who refuses to let people die. Tears were streaming down Vince's face now. 8 years of grief and guilt finally cracking open. I miss them, he whispered. Every day, I see their faces. I hear them on the radio calling for help I couldn't give. I know, Admiral Hawkins said, his own eyes wet. But Vincent, they wouldn't want you suffering like this. They'd want you using those skills to save others. Which is exactly what you did today. Bellamy was standing there looking uncomfortable and confused, clearly trying to process how to handle this situation. Mr. Romano, he finally said carefully, his earlier anger completely gone. I think we need to have a conversation about your employment here. I was already fired, Vince said bitterly, for trying to warn maintenance about the HVAC failure before it became catastrophic. Bellamy's face went pale. You warned them? Before it failed, I found the refrigerant leak 2 hours before the system seized, Vince confirmed. Called it in. Was told I was overstepping and fired for unauthorized access to the mechanical room. Bellamy turned to one of his executives. Get me Frank from maintenance. Now. He turned back to Vince. Mr. Romano, Colonel Romano, I'm reinstating you immediately. With a significant promotion. Director of Security and Emergency Operations. Full benefits, salary commensurate with your military rank and experience. And I want you to develop comprehensive emergency protocols for this property. Vince stared at him in shock. You're offering me a job? After I was just fired. I'm offering you the job you should have had all along, Bellamy said firmly, business instincts overriding everything else. You coordinated a flawless evacuation of 4,000 people in 90 minutes with 0 fatalities. You have military command experience. You clearly understand crisis management better than anyone on my staff. This hotel needs you in a leadership position. I have PTSD, Vince said bluntly, his voice challenging. Nightmares. Flashbacks. I'm broken. Then we'll provide proper treatment, Bellamy said without hesitation. The best psychiatrists in Las Vegas. Full medical support. Whatever you need. But Vincent, he looked directly into Vince's eyes. Broken people can still do extraordinary things. You proved that today. Before Vince could respond, Patricia stepped forward. Theodore, I need to say something, she said, her voice carrying emotion. I almost dismissed Vincent this morning. Saw him as just another janitor. But he saved this hotel and everyone in it. If we're recognizing his value, we need to recognize all our employees' value. How many other people are we missing because we don't look past their job titles? Bellamy nodded slowly. Point taken. Admiral Hawkins cleared his throat. If I may, Vincent, there's something else you should know. I'm currently on the board of the Navy Fighter Weaponry Trial Continue School at Fallon. We've been developing a new crisis management training program for aviators transitioning to civilian life. We need someone with real combat experience and proven leadership under extreme pressure. I'd like you to consider joining us as an instructor. Vince shook his head, overwhelmed. I can't fly anymore. The PTSD. You don't have to fly, Admiral Hawkins interrupted gently. You just have to teach what you know. Share the skills that save lives today. Help other veterans find purpose after service. Vincent, you spent 8 years believing you had nothing to offer. Today proved that's not true. Vince looked around at all these people, strangers hours ago, now offering him opportunities he'd stopped believing were possible. Purpose, employment, treatment, recognition. It was terrifying. I need time to think, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Take all the time you need, Bellamy said. But the offer stands. And Vincent? Thank you. For today. For everything. 24 hours later. The news coverage was inescapable. Heroic janitor saves thousands in Vegas hotel evacuation, screamed the headlines. Former Top Gun pilot working as janitor prevents tragedy at Bellagio. Navy combat veteran emerges from obscurity to coordinate massive life-saving operation. Vince sat in a hotel room. Complimentary, provided by Bellamy, watching the coverage with numb disbelief. His photo was everywhere. Military records were being discussed. Reporters were calling him a hero. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt exposed. Vulnerable. Like the protective invisibility he'd built over 8 years had been violently stripped away. His phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. Hello, he answered cautiously. Vince. It's Angela. His ex-wife. He hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. How did you get this number? He asked quietly. I saw the news, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I saw the news, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I saw what you did. Vince, I'm so proud of you. And I'm so sorry. Sorry for what? For giving up on you, Angela said, starting to cry. For leaving when you needed support. I thought you were broken beyond repair. But you weren't broken, you were surviving. And yesterday you proved you never stopped being the man I married. The hero, the leader. I'm sorry I couldn't see that. Vince felt tears sliding down his own cheeks. You had every right to leave. I was barely functional. I pushed you away. You were hurting, Angela corrected gently. And I should have fought harder to help you heal. Vince, her voice cracked. Is there any chance we could talk? Really talk? Maybe try to reconnect. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Vince admitted honestly. I'm still figuring out who I am now. Then take your time, Angela said. But know that I'm here. When you're ready. If you're ever ready. Because the man who saved 4,000 people yesterday, that's the man I fell in love with. and I never stopped loving him. After they hung up, Vince sat in silence, processing everything. Another knock at the door. This time it was Patricia Chun, carrying a large envelope. "May I come in?" she asked. Vince nodded, stepping aside. Patricia sat down, studying him carefully. "How are you holding up?" "Overwhelmed," Vince admitted. 24 hours ago, I was invisible. Now I'm all over the news. I don't know how to process this." "Then let me help," Patricia said, opening the envelope. "These are personnel files for 12 former military members currently working in service positions at Bellagio Properties. Housekeeping, kitchen staff, maintenance, security guards, all of them decorated veterans. All of them hiding in plain sight just like you were." She spread the files across the table. "This is Master Sergeant Thompson, Army Rangers, working as a dishwasher. Captain Liu, Air Force Logistics, working in housekeeping. Lieutenant Sanchez, Marine Corps Infantry, working night security. Vince," she looked at him with intensity, "you're not alone. There are dozens of broken veterans working invisible jobs in this city because they don't know what else to do." "What's your point?" Vince asked quietly. "My point is that you have a chance to help them," Patricia said firmly. "Bellamy's serious about that director position. If you take it, you could create a veterans employment program. Identify these hidden soldiers, get them proper treatment, find them positions that use their actual skills. You could transform lives, Vince. Just like Admiral Hawkins wants you to do at Fallon." She pulled out one more document. "And this is from me personally. My husband, the carrier pilot I mentioned, he came home from deployment with PTSD. Spent 3 years struggling before he finally got proper treatment. He's thriving now, running a veteran support nonprofit in San Diego. If he could heal, you can too. But you have to stop hiding first." Vince stared at the personnel files, seeing his own story repeated 12 times over. Decorated warriors reduced to invisible labor because nobody knew how to help them transition. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Patricia smiled sadly. "That's all I ask." 6 months later, Vincent Romano stood in the Bellagio's newly renovated Emergency Operations Center, watching multiple screens displaying hotel security feeds, monitoring systems, and emergency protocols. The nameplate on his desk read, "Vincent Romano, Director of Security and Emergency Operations." But the title he was most proud of was different. On the wall behind his desk hung a certificate, Veterans Transition Program, Founder and Director. In 6 months, Vince had transformed not just his own life, but dozens of others. He'd taken Bellamy's offer, developed comprehensive emergency protocols for all MGM properties, created training programs that other hotels were now copying. But more importantly, he'd identified 43 veterans working invisible jobs across Vegas hotels, got them proper VA treatment, connected them with therapists who understood military trauma, found them positions that utilized their actual skills. Master Sergeant Thompson was now head of kitchen operations at the Bellagio. Captain Liu ran housekeeping logistics across 3 properties. Lieutenant Sanchez had become assistant director of security, veterans helping veterans, building a network of support that the VA couldn't provide alone. Admiral Hawkins had also followed through. Vince spent 2 days each month at Fallon Naval Air Station, teaching crisis management to transitioning pilots, helping them understand that leaving service didn't mean abandoning purpose. His PTSD was better, not gone. It would never be fully gone, but manageable. The nightmares came maybe once a week now. The flashbacks were less frequent. He'd learned coping mechanisms that actually worked, and he'd reconnected with Angela. Slowly, carefully. They were dating again, taking it one day at a time, rebuilding trust and intimacy that trauma had destroyed. "Vince," a voice called. He turned to see Patricia entering the operations center, accompanied by a young man in his 20s wearing an Army veteran cap. "This is Specialist Marcus Webb," Patricia said. "Army combat medic. Just got discharged. He's been working as a parking attendant for 2 weeks, but I thought you'd want to meet him." Vince recognized that look in Marcus's eyes, the same haunted distance he'd carried for 8 years. "Marcus," Vince said, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service. Tell me about your experience." Marcus shook his hand reluctantly. 3 tours. Afghanistan. Lost my entire squad in an ambush. I'm the only one who made it out. Been trying to adjust. Vince's chest tightened with recognition. "I know that story. I lived that story. Want to hear how it ends differently?" Marcus looked up with desperate hope in his eyes. For the next hour, Vince shared his journey. The hiding, the shame, the breakthrough, the healing, and most importantly, the purpose he'd found by helping others. I can't promise it won't hurt, Vince said honestly. The grief doesn't disappear. But Marcus, you survived for a reason. Your squad died protecting others. Honor them by continuing that mission. Use your medical training. Save lives. That's how you transform survival from punishment into purpose. Marcus was crying silently, nodding. We have a position in hotel medical services, Vince said. Emergency response coordinator. It's yours if you want it. Plus full access to our veterans support network. Therapy. Resources. People who understand. Why? Marcus asked, his voice breaking. Why would you do this for me? Because 8 years ago, nobody did it for me, Vince said simply. I spent almost a decade hiding because I didn't know there was another option. I'm not letting other veterans make that same mistake. We save each other now. That's how this works. Marcus broke down completely, and Vince put a hand on his shoulder, the understanding touch of someone who'd walked the same dark path and found his way back to the light. 1 year later, epilogue. The Navy Fighter Weapons School auditorium was packed with 200 transitioning aviators, all facing uncertain futures after leaving military service. Vince stood at the podium in his civilian suit, no longer uncomfortable with the attention. A year and a half ago, he began, his voice steady and clear. I was mopping floors in a Vegas casino, convinced I had nothing to offer the world. I'd been a decorated combat pilot, but PTSD had broken me so completely that I couldn't imagine ever being whole again. I was wrong. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, pilots who were where he'd been, scared of civilian life after years of military purpose. I learned something during a hotel evacuation crisis, Vince continued. Being broken doesn't mean being useless. Trauma doesn't erase competence. And surviving when others didn't isn't punishment. It's responsibility. The responsibility to honor the fallen by continuing the mission they believed in. He told them about his squadron. About Jackson and Martinez and Williams and Chun and Rodriguez and Thompson and Davis. About 8 years of running. About the moment he chose to stop hiding. The skills that made you warriors don't disappear when you take off the uniform, Vince said, his voice growing stronger. They transform. Crisis management becomes business leadership. Tactical planning becomes project management. Combat discipline becomes professional excellence. You're not losing your identity, you're evolving it. He gestured to the veterans sitting in the front row, graduates of his transition program, who'd found successful civilian careers. Master Sergeant Thompson runs kitchen operations at a major hotel. Captain Lou manages logistics for a hospitality chain. Lieutenant Sanchez directs security for multiple properties. Specialist Webb coordinates emergency medical response. They're not warriors anymore. They're leaders using military training to excel in civilian fields. Vince pulled up a slide showing statistics. Our Veterans Transition Program has helped 137 service members in 18 months. Employment rate, 93%. Retention rate, 87%. And most importantly, PTSD treatment engagement rate, 100%. Because we don't just find you jobs, we help you heal. The applause was warm and sustained. After the speech, Vince was surrounded by transitioning pilots wanting advice, sharing their own struggles, asking how to find purpose after service. Admiral Hawkins appeared through the crowd, smiling with pride and emotion. You've built something remarkable, Vincent, the Admiral said warmly. This program is changing lives. The Navy wants to expand it nationally, create transition centers at every major base, and they want you leading the effort. Vince shook his head, smiling. I'm honored, but I think I'm where I need to be. Vegas, running the program, helping veterans one at a time. Fair enough, Admiral Hawkins said. But Vincent, do you ever miss flying? Vince was quiet for a moment, remembering the feeling of being in a cockpit, the freedom of flight, the clarity of purpose at 30,000 feet. Every day, he admitted quietly. But I've found a different way to fly now. Helping others. Building something meaningful. That soars in its own way. His phone buzzed. A text from Angela. Saw your speech on the live stream. So proud. Dinner tonight? I have news to share. Vince smiled and texted back. Absolutely. Can't wait. As he left the auditorium, Vince passed a mirror and caught his reflection. He looked different now than the hollow-eyed janitor from 18 months ago. Healthier. Present. alive in a way he hadn't been for years. The trauma hadn't disappeared. He still carried his fallen squadron in his heart every day. But he'd learned to carry them differently. Not as crushing guilt, but as honored memory. Not as punishment for surviving, but as motivation to make that survival matter. He pulled out his wallet and looked at a worn photo he kept there. His squadron, arms around each other, brothers who'd never come home. Still here, brothers, he whispered. Still fighting. Still saving people. Hope I'm making you proud. In his heart, he knew they were. Because somewhere in the Syrian desert, 7 fallen pilots were watching their squadron leader continue the mission. And somewhere in a Vegas casino, a broken janitor had learned to fly again. Not by forgetting the past, but by transforming pain into purpose. Not by pretending to be unbroken, but by proving that broken people could still save lives, still lead, still matter. Vincent Romano walked out into the Nevada sunshine, heading toward his car and the dinner with Angela where she'd reveal she was pregnant with their second chance at family. Tomorrow, he'd train more veterans, develop more programs, save more lives by helping others save themselves. Because that's what survivors do. They honor the fallen by living fully. They transform tragedy into legacy. They refuse to let trauma define them while acknowledging it shaped them. And sometimes, on the days when purpose feels impossible, they find it anyway. Because 218 people at the Bellagio needed someone extraordinary. Because hundreds of struggling veterans would need someone who understood. Because Jackson and Martinez and Williams and Chun and Rodriguez and Thompson and Davis didn't die, so their lessons could be wasted. They died protecting others. And Vincent Romano would spend the rest of his life honoring that sacrifice by continuing the mission. One veteran helped at a time. One crisis managed at a time. One life transformed at a time. The end.